Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for joining us for our webinar on overcoming energy sector bias and ageism, with a focus on, communicating with employers. This webinar, along with sort of a series that we've been doing around the talent needs for the evolving energy ecosystem, is funded by the Alberta government. And we appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. So this webinar really has been designed by acknowledging that there are perceptions amongst employers regarding energy workers and mature workers. And so, we wanted to provide insights to you, and I'm not going to go through these because these align with what you signed up with. When you signed up for the webinar, these were what you were signing up for. But what I wanted to say is that today's webinar really focuses on giving you some information, tools, and tips to focus on what you have control over when it comes to overcoming or addressing some of these barriers associated with what perceptions might be out there about who you are as a job seeker. And so a lot of it is about how to present your value, how to target your career transition and job search, and then also that whole piece around enhancing your mental wellness and resilience to be as productive as possible in this process of transitioning your career as well as your job search. Just a couple of things related to the webinar protocols. We are recording this meeting, and we will circulate the recording as well as the slides following this session. We're going to do a couple of polls, and these are really, they're anonymous polls. We really use what you tell us to inform our ongoing work so that we can really sort of ensure that what we're doing meets your needs. We're going to ask you to remain on mute for the entirety of the webinar, but we are looking to wrap up this session with a Q&A period. And so please use chat to ask questions or even share any reactions. And if you'd prefer to direct message us with your questions, you can, just at the bottom right-hand corner under chat, that does give you the opportunity to direct message any of the co-hosts or presenters. So I want to start out by saying, in terms of, feeling like ageism and, you're facing a bias as a career transitioner with oil and gas experience, you're not alone in doing that. And so, we're really looking at what to do, what's within your locus of control to be able to address some of those biases. And interestingly enough, that second kind of barrier that, 42% of our previous webinar attendees indicated that they're just uncertain as to how to assess their transferability of skills and experience into another sector. That actually provides us some insights into what has to be done and the process for addressing employer bias and ageism. And again, just to reiterate, those are some of the activities that are within your control. And I do want to say, we're not going to make light throughout this webinar in terms of how difficult it can be to understand how to apply your skills and experience in your usual occupation or your usual industry into a different sector. And so I just want to indicate that if you're not already working with a career counselor, that that may be something you want to consider doing. And we can share some resources. In fact, Avery, at the end of her presentation, identifies where some of those free services are available. So I just want to leave you with that notion. So in terms of understanding, what you can do to overcome, those barriers related to how employers are perceiving you, we wanted to share with you what we're actually hearing from employers, because we feel that this would really help to make informed decisions related to your career transition and job search. So this is what we've heard from employers, and specifically HR people, are top concerns related to hiring from the oil and gas talent pool. And this is results of a survey that we conducted about 10 months ago with over 100 HR professionals in Alberta. And so these are the top concerns that they expressed are limiting them to look at the oil and gas talent pool. And these are, we've designed this webinar to help you proactively address some of these prior to applying for a role. So the first one, this uncertainty about how to assess transferability of oil and gas skills. That's very interesting, because we're hearing that from job seekers as being, something they're unsure about doing. Plus, we have employers saying the exact same thing. So we can certainly see how bridging that gap between the oil and gas talent and perhaps sectors that have employment opportunities, how that's going to be difficult to do if there isn't an understanding of how skills and knowledge transfer. The other thing we're going to talk about is this idea that we're hearing from employers that there's concerns about how oil and gas talent will fit into their work environment from a culture perspective. And culture is so intangible. I think it's about gaining an understanding about what this is and how do you go about communicating your ability to fit in culturally. And we're going to spend some time on that. Obviously, compensation expectations are concerns from employers, because it's well known that the oil and gas industry has always been one of the sectors that pays its workers at the highest percentiles. And so there's always concerns about whether or not compensation expectations can be matched. And then finally, this concept that oil and gas workers are a retention risk, because employees are more likely to leave when the oil and gas industry starts hiring again. So these really, we've sort of, consolidated these concerns so that we can consolidate the information we're sharing with you about how to address them. In our survey, though, we also did hear that there are sectors, and these are listed below, that have hired from the oil and gas talent pool. And I think this just validates that there are opportunities for transitioning your skill sets into other sectors within the Alberta economy. The other thing we wanted to share with you is around what we're hearing our employers' hiring needs and how they're approaching recruitment differently. So large companies, including, the sort of typical oil and gas company, and I suspect if you come from oil and gas, this is what you're most used to in terms of an overall recruitment approach. But what we're hearing from these companies that are large and have a large employee base is right now, a lot of them are focused on internal redeployment and upskilling. So in some ways that is limiting the opportunities with this particular, with this group of companies. And sorry, my dog thinks she needs to be part of this presentation. We're also hearing that from large companies that are maybe having to transition, looking at innovation, applying digital solutions, or expanding their supply chain, that they're looking to other sectors to try and fill some of those roles. And they are continuing to invest in that talent pipeline development. So internships, co-ops, those kinds of things. And so we wanted to share from, just an understanding of what's happening internally within some of those large companies, to provide some insights into why you may be finding it more difficult to kind of get in your foot in the door with companies that you feel would use your skill sets. We also know that they use a broad array of attraction approaches, so certainly including social media. But at the end of the day, their hiring processes are some of those more traditional structured kinds of processes, which means you're going to have to apply online and go through sort of that, that kind of process in order to make your way to an interview. What we're hearing from small companies that are in some maturing sectors, and so when we say maturing sectors, think about, the renewable sector, where they've really kind of got a foothold now in terms of expanding into Alberta, or even some digital companies. And these are the companies that we're hearing are valuing experienced workers that can really demonstrate that ability to drive operational efficiency, because as they're maturing, they're trying to become more efficient and increase their own profit margins. And so this may be an opportunity for you as an experienced worker to think about whether or not what you bring to the table would help these kinds of companies do what they're trying to do. They use social media a lot in terms of recruitment, and their processes, their hiring processes, tend to be more of a mix of those structured, more traditional processes, but they also leverage relationships. And so when I talk about relationships, not just referring to, it means who you know, but it means that there's been some sort of personal connection along the way, so that they maybe understand or know a person beyond what might be presented on their resume. So it really is about thinking about, if that's a type of hiring that's happening within companies that might value your experience more so, how do you start preparing to engage in some of that kind of relationship building? And then finally, small companies in emerging sectors. And when you think about emerging sectors, anything, say, in the clean tech space would be an emerging sector. Those that are just, starting to get a foothold in our economy. And they really are looking for talent that has a depth and breadth of experience, but also can be productive and effective in a much more flexible or agile culture, because they are in that innovative kind of place. And we'll help define that a little bit more further on. And a lot of the hiring that's happening within these emerging sectors is happening because of leveraging those relationships. So think about, again, if you're trying to build those relationships, opportunities to network, how do you, get somebody to help you make an introduction, looking for mentorship, those kinds of things that will help you build those relationships that could lead to an employment opportunity. Finally, the other thing in terms of the employer's perspective, just wanted to share our research in where we have discovered that those with oil and gas experience have perhaps the greatest transferability opportunity, because the oil and gas industry itself, as it's moving towards sustainability, has really shifted what some of its priority activities are. And in trying to fulfill those priority activities, they're expanding their supply chain, or the full sort of energy ecosystem is expanding to include sectors and companies that are going to help the oil and gas industry become more sustainable. And so the left-hand side of this chart really talks about, what we're hearing from oil and gas is their priorities going forward. And the right-hand side of the chart are those sectors and companies that we are seeing are becoming part of a broader ecosystem to assist the industry make the transition that they require to be more sustainable. So, the industry is looking to automation and digitization to address both cost and environmental challenges. That whole ESG and the impact on attracting investment and social license is also top of mind. Expanding markets. And so we can see that within that whole striving for sustainability, we're seeing high tech, industrial construction and maintenance, clean tech. Oil and gas is investing in renewables. And so those sectors that are supporting the oil and gas industry to address its priority activities are also those that we deem to perhaps see domain oil and gas knowledge as being as having value to them. So when you think about targeting your career transition or your job search, think about overlaying that intel about what employers are saying their focus is for hiring and how they're hiring, with some of these sectors that we've assessed as being adjacent to the oil and gas industry, and therefore perhaps more interested in the kinds of skills and knowledge you bring to the table. So back to that idea of, uncertainty about how to assess and communicate your transferable skills, and employers, or where the sectors where there might be potential employment opportunities also not understanding how to sort of translate oil and gas skills into what they need. It really is about developing your transition story to help overcome that sort of gap that we identified, that there's not a lot of certainty around how oil and gas domain knowledge and expertise can assist other sectors within our economy. So the first notion, and here's kind of the catch, is facilitating that communication between how you provide value to an employer outside of the oil and gas sector. That really is your responsibility. And this is where, back to that idea of you have more control over this. You cannot rely on a recruiter or an employer to read your resume and be able to do that sort of translation of what your resume says to what their needs are. This is your responsibility. And again, we're not making light of how difficult this can be. It's going to require a lot of self-reflection on your part in terms of what you bring to the table for value, to employers, it also is about understanding what you really need from a workplace or from an employer to address that issue related to being a retention concern. You need to be able to proactively talk about why you're making this transition. But you also need to understand the employer's needs. What problems, where are they at in that maturity life cycle? What problems do they have, so that you can, just like this slide is saying, bring fit the pieces of the puzzle together for them and really tell your story about how your skills and experience is of value to them. And this is not just telling your story in your resume or covering letter. It's also in all those relationship building kinds of activities that we indicated so many smaller companies use as part of their hiring process to to build that relationship. So we're not making light of how difficult this can be. And so really what we're going to focus on in this workshop is at highlighting how you can do this and also provide you with some tools. And so this tool, a workbook called Starting With You, can really help facilitate that self-reflection that we're indicating you need to do in order to, one, understand what the skills and experiences you have and bring to the table, and how you can use that to focus your job search and career transition. So we're going to walk you through this worksheet as part of this webinar, and we will also make sure that it's sent to you with the PowerPoint and the recording. And we really encourage you, when you're using sort of this self-reflection, to really start by putting yourself in a good place. I mean, when you're looking at what you're bringing to the table, you need to think about, work situations where you felt energized and motivated, times when you had a sense of accomplishment, or things where you received positive feedback from others. And that really is sort of the frame of mind that we recommend you have when you're doing this individual exercise related to thinking about what you bring to the table. And then the other piece to this work, of course, is understanding employers' needs, whether that be, at an industry level or a specific company level. And so we can't overemphasize the need to do solid market research on the industries you're interested in and the employers or companies that you're interested in to understand where they're at and what they need. In fact, in speaking to career counselors, one of the key characteristics that differentiate successful career transitioners from others is this ability to do effective market research. And I know we probably have some career counselors on the line, so if you have anything more to add to that, please include it in the chat and provide some of the other participants a little bit more kind of context for how important this is. So what is market research? Well, it's different than job search. Market research is really about gathering information about industries or companies that help you understand what problems they're facing, where they're at in that maturing life cycle. Are they a startup? Are they emerging? Are they maturing? And what does that translate into what their talent needs might be? And so we're here, what we've provided here is just some of the sources and resources for the market research that we do in this space, trying to understand the hiring requirements within Alberta's economy and the evolving energy ecosystem. And so we're sharing them with you as a bit of a starting point where you can leverage, your own market research. But I also want to emphasize that this is not a point in time kind of exercise. With the way our economy is evolving and recovering, coming out of COVID, as well as just a pickup in activity, that this has to be an ongoing effort in order to understand how things are changing. And we can speak to this in spades. I mean, and we've been doing this work for years, but I can tell you that in some spaces, like the clean tech space, the amount of change that's occurred in that space and the companies and individual sub-technologies that are emerging has changed significantly just in the last 3 or 4 months. So this is something that need to incorporate in your practice, your job search process, for the long term. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Cheryl.
Thanks very much, Pat. Good morning, everybody. So what I'd like to do first is provide you our framework to help you to assess your best path to employment. And we're focusing on sector to sector transferability and answering those the 2 questions that Pat highlighted in the Starting With You resource. And the 2 questions I'm going to focus on are, what do I have to offer? And what do I want? And in order to come to a focus as to the sectors that you're going to transition to, it's very important to answer those 2 questions. And for those of you who have attended our webinars in the past, some of this is going to look very familiar to you. So in assessing sector to sector transferability, we've identified 3 criteria that are equally important. However, I find that the first criteria is often the greater focus. So I would urge you to go beyond assessing your technical transferability to also assessing how well you fit in a 2 sector based on the nature of work and the value proposition offered. Now, I'm going to define those in more detail in upcoming slides, but I'll just say that we have done that for you and rated sector transferability from oil and gas to those 2 sectors as high, medium, or low using these 3 criteria. So let's talk first, excuse me. I knew I would have to cough, so I just thought I'd get it out of the way. So we're going to start first with technical transferability. So in Starting With You, the question, what do I have, is all about your technical transferability. So in essence, we're looking at your technical skills in oil and gas to any sector in the economy. And obviously our focus is on those adjacent sectors, but you can use this methodology for any sector that you might have an interest in. So your technical transferability is made up of that qualifications and education and certifications that you bring to the table, but also the business and operational processes that you have become adept in working with, as well as equipment and technology and the whole regulatory environment and the types of stakeholders or customers you deal with. And we know that we're all different people in terms of what we're good at. So the fundamental question, and again, this is in starting with you, if you download the workbook or look at it when we send it to you, the fundamental question is how you like to use your skill and knowledge. Is it working with data, information, or ideas? Is it working with people, or is it working with things? So that essentially breaks down technical transferability. But now what I'd like to do is show you how we've applied technical transferability from oil and gas to those adjacent sectors in the evolving energy ecosystem. So what we've done here on the left, and there's 2 slides. So we've broken down the areas of expertise that you likely bring, not all of them, of course, but the range of expertise that you bring with you. And we've put it in clusters of equipment, technology, and other expertise that is common and fundamental to oil and gas. And then looking across the top, we've identified those adjacent sectors in renewable energy, clean tech, petrochemicals, and LNG operations to indicate how those sectors will value that oil and gas expertise. And you'll see here, we've broken down renewable energy into geothermal, solar, and wind. And we've broken down clean tech into 6 subsectors. So we often get asked the question, what is clean tech anyway? And if you've been listening to the news about the upcoming COP summit, there's a lot of discussion about the importance of clean tech as applied to improving the environmental performance of the fossil fuel industry. So this is how we break down clean tech in that way. So going back to the oil and gas expertise, here's the second slide that lists the other areas of expertise. And we think that you can identify the expertise that you bring to help you to understand the 2 sectors that will value this experience. And you know what? If you've got an interest in a sector other than those that we've listed here, you can very much use this methodology of assessing your sector to sector transferability to any sector in the economy. So where do you find this information? You can find it on careertransitions.ca in the Energy Career Transition and Employment Resource. And that's this group of PowerPoint slides that you can find here by opening up this part of the website. And the PowerPoint slides are navigatable through these hyperlinks so that you can go through and focus on the sector that you're interested in. And it also goes into occupation to occupation transferability that is not covered in this webinar. So that summarizes sector to sector transferability, looking at the technical transferability criteria. We're now going to go into the nature of work transferability criteria. So what is the nature of work? So remember, we're looking at the transferability from oil and gas to other sectors that are adjacent in oil and gas. So we've assessed the nature of work transferability relative to how close the fit is or the similarity to work arrangements as an employee, contractor, working mobile, requirements to travel, and so on, to the work environment, which includes indoor, outdoors, small companies, large companies, location, and really the workplace culture that might be present and different or similar to the workplace culture in oil and gas into those 2 sectors. So a culture is broken down by the nature of work relationships, the level of hierarchy, the amount of risk, the degree of structure, and so on. So in starting with you, the workbook will ask you to think about what is it that you want with respect to nature of work transferability. What is the kind of place that you want to work in? What is the nature of those work relationships where you're most comfortable, as well as the work environment, the types of relationships you have, and so on. But I don't want to forget these deal breakers. We all have deal breakers in terms of the nature of work. I really don't want an organization that's highly structured and with a command and control environment. I've worked in one. I won't tell you which one, but I wouldn't want to repeat that again. So for me, that's a deal breaker. And it's important when I'm looking at those two sectors to recognize that and not to go to those sectors or companies that provide that. So when looking at nature of work, Pat and I have heard abundant feedback about the importance of technical skills, but also the importance of universal attributes that are really critical as the energy ecosystem evolves and the types of organizations and companies in that energy ecosystem becomes much more varied than in your typical oil and gas environment. And that's because technology development and innovation involves a much greater degree of collaboration and along different timelines than perhaps the oil and gas industry is accustomed to working. And this has meant that soft skills, attitudes, and behaviors, some of which you'll have, and some that you may want to develop, are really important to highlight and complement along with your technical and educational experience. So some of these are agility, demonstrating an ability to be mobile, to iterate as you discover, develop, and deploy in an innovation environment. Systems thinking, which involves asking the right questions, looking at the big picture, and non-linear types of thinking. Business acumen, strategic focus, really the importance of relationships, and quite frankly, different types of dynamics than you would have found in oil and gas, again, with that master servant agreements. Many of you would have heard about those types of agreements in oil and gas. Well, those are breaking down. So the relationships within that broader energy ecosystem are built on expanded supply chains, different types of companies interacting, and the need for mutual respect and trust, and really being equal amongst owners and team members and customers. So the question I'd like to leave you with is, what behaviors in this list have you demonstrated in the past? And which behaviors can you learn and demonstrate and show employers that you're capable to demonstrating in the workplace? So finally, in our sector to sector transferability, I want to get into the final question in the what do I want? And that is about your value proposition transferability. So in looking at value proposition from oil and gas to those two sectors, value proposition asks you to think about what do you want and perhaps need that will increase the likelihood that you can provide evidence and make a strong case that you're not only going to accept the employment offer, but you're going to stay. You're not a retention risk. You're not one of those oil and gas people that is going to leave when a higher pay package comes to you. So you really need to think about the full elements of the value proposition transferability. So this again includes compensation and thinking about what level of compensation is a deal breaker, because obviously we all have that bottom line. What locations of work are you able to be flexible about? What role level do you need or want or have to have? what career development opportunities are important to you, and maybe career development and training and what the organization commits to in terms of values and what they stand for are more important or equalize, perhaps a compromise in compensation. So these are the things to think about and that you'll be prompted to think about in starting with you. And with respect to salary, very much you ought to know what is the competitive salary and compensation package that will be offered by the two sector, and research that information. And we've included some of those resources here. So in putting that together, it's up to you to tell your transition story, as well to sell it in a way that you're able to overcome those employer biases or the potential employer biases. Let's face it, as time marches on, I think those biases are reducing. So tell and sell your story with respect to the value of what you bring from oil and gas, and to overcome any perceptions of bias towards your age. So how do you tell your transition story, or where do you tell it? So where you tell it is within your cover letter, your resume, and through those interactions in interviews and networking. So first off, think about, why are you looking to change industries? What's the motivation? Why do you know that you need to or want to shift industries? And what are you keen about it? What excites you about making this change? And then, based on the technical nature of work and value proposition transferability, provide the evidence of why you're a fit. Show them that you've done that assessment for them, and tell the story to those representatives in the two sector, and make sure you've done enough research to use their terminology. Don't expect them to translate the oil and gas lingo to their sector. You need to do that. And then finally, show that you've invested in your transition and you've engaged in developing new skills and knowledge through a variety of ways. That includes job shadowing, volunteering, attending webinars and training, lunch and learns, and so on. So I'm going to apply some of those things that I've just conveyed with respect to potential bias towards oil and gas, towards addressing potential bias applied to your age. And again, I feel like I can speak from experience, in that some of our preconceived notions about our age are very much a part of how we project ourselves and what we've done, and our internal sensitivities about our age, as much as how others perceive us. So, first look at yourself and then modify your approach to addressing ageism. And those approaches are very similar to addressing energy sector bias. So, the first point is acknowledging that it's real. Most of us are mid-career in that oil and gas transition talent pool. And so it's valid that ageism can occur, but employers are also looking for things that you offer. So you really need to focus first on the advantages that you bring and the experiences that you have that demonstrate that you are able to adapt to working with a variety of work situations and a variety of experiences and a variety of people. So you've got years of experience, you've got qualities and abilities, and you're going to address that in your cover letter, resume, interviews, and networking. I firmly believe that your cover letter needs to be customized for every time you send your resume. You may not customize your resume every time, but certainly your cover letter does need to be customized. You need to not not sort of send out a buckshot of applications, but to target the employers that are most likely to benefit from the value that you bring. And how do you target those employers? Well, you do that through market research that Pat described that you conduct. Lastly, don't fall into the pitfalls that we all fall into. I often hear people tell me their age. Don't tell me that. I may have the perception based on the way you present yourself that you're younger, or quite frankly, not even thinking about it because all of the advantages that you're offering. So don't tell me your age, and don't tell me your age in your resume. Don't list the years that you've graduated. That telegraphs your age. And don't list every job since graduation. Employers don't read back that far, and quite frankly, they don't see all experience going back to when you graduated as relevant. So manage the marketing of your advantages, your experience, qualities, and abilities by essentially managing any data that provides evidence in your age. I'm going to suggest that you go into Alice and read the resources that are there to help mature workers. I must say they're really extensive and extremely impressive. So I think it's very much worth your time. So let's go into a little bit more information on how to do that market research and to monitor employment opportunities as they appear in the environment. But how do you scan the environment to understand how what you're reading and hearing about on the news and through the organizations that you're connected with to get their newsletters and updates, how do you translate that information into understanding what it means to you in terms of employment opportunities? So you do that by looking at the early indicators or lead indicators of labor demand. So these lead indicators, again, are evident through your reading, through your connections on social media and your connections with organizations, and monitoring the political, social, and economic environment. And the way you understand the lead indicators of jobs, of labor demand, is through investment announcements from government, accelerators, and industry. By reading the signals of government programs that indicate that measurement is going to be required, that there are regulations, that there are incentives to investments or stimulating activities in certain fields, certain subsectors, and those regulations that drive those activities and drive jobs. And by understanding the workforce demographics from those labor market organizations that tell you that a sector is aging and there's likely to be turnover in addition to growth. And in looking at the drivers of labor demand or those indicators of demand, pay attention to timelines so that you understand whether the jobs are currently available in the short term, or whether they're on the horizon in the medium term or long term. And those jobs that are available on the horizon gives you the opportunity to upskill. And quite frankly, most employers understand that training that is valuable to them is very often that micro-credential training, those bolt-on courses that you can accomplish through your own research or through the myriad of short courses that are becoming more increasingly available. So this is what Pat and I do. This is sort of a snapshot of what we do daily and nightly, quite frankly, to keep up to date on that social, political, and economic environment. And it's come with years of experience, and we're going to basically give you the roadmap and tell you how we do it. So on the left is a breakdown of the leading indicators of labor demand or jobs that I've described earlier. And this is spending announcements from companies and associations, as well as spending announcements from, you can include government and accelerators in there. Regulations with examples of some of the regulations that are occurring in that adjacent energy ecosystem. Incentives and recovery programs that are providing investments to support industry investments and spurring activities. And we haven't said much about this, but the life cycle of industries or sectors and the value chain. So you can find out more about this in careertransitions.ca, but I'll just say that in a two sector, let's say construction or clean tech or renewables, every sector has a life cycle or value chain, as does oil and gas. And your experience may be a better fit for certain phases of that life cycle or value chain than others. So pay attention to that. Is your experience in project development and project management of capital projects, or is it on the operations side? So again, take a look at that life cycle of those two sectors, and those are broken down for you in careertransitions.ca. And here's the sources of information that we connect with. I'm not intending to say you ought to connect with all of them, because you should focus your job search on those two sectors where your technical nature of work and value proposition transferability is high or medium, and pick those sources where you have the best opportunity to transition. And this is just a sample. Every sector has specific sources that are specific to them. So I see there's a number of questions in chat. We're going to, do you know what, Pat? We've got a few minutes before we move on to mental resilience and wellness. So I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here. Let's answer a few of them in the few minutes that we have available. And then go on to mental resilience and wellness. So Pat, maybe just pick a couple, or if you could answer a couple that you think helps to clarify some of the information that we've presented, and then we'll leave the rest to the end.
Yeah, I think some of the conversation in chat is both, questions as well as just, some expressing frustration that ageism is very real. And, we are not here to deny that it isn't. And so I guess, part of what I'm seeing here is, this feeling like, applying for positions, but and not even getting an interview, and then seeing who gets the job, and it's all those, mid-30s range, that kind of stuff. Is there anything, Cheryl, you can sort of reinforce in what we've said that, would help in terms of, targeting or where to apply for certain jobs?
Sorry, and I was reading the chat. And I missed the crux of your question, where physically to apply for jobs or what sectors?
How to help target, those who might value your
okay.
experience more?
Okay, so I would start first with looking at the size of the organization. In our experience, larger companies are those that have the most sophisticated recruitment processes, and they're investing in developing their internal assets and deploying them to increased adoption of technology and innovation, and then hiring very skilled people from other sectors or new grads with specific backgrounds. So very often larger companies will be perhaps the last place you should look. I would suggest that you look at smaller companies that are in emerging sectors that need people to hit the ground running and also need people to be a bit of a unicorn. So that means having that broader range of skills, having those universal soft skills, and familiar with working in a significant array of different work environments. So I would say smaller companies that are new and startups, and even those that are in mature sectors who will recognize that oil and gas experience involves a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of investment in training, and you need to promote that investment with you as a person. I'm just going to pick up on one other thing that I was reading and distracted by when Pat asked me the question. I'm an ex-HR person, and it goes back a long ways. I will say that some things never change. And as a recruiter, you always post the minimum amount of experience you need. You post a range, the 5 to 8 years of experience. That's the minimum. You should read that to say, if you've got 3 years of experience, don't apply. You should not read that to say, if you have 15 years of experience, don't apply. If you're not applying because of that, if you're seeing that as a barrier, I believe that's your own personal barrier. However, the other element that I was reading about that, and I was quite interested in that chat, is that the compensation that a company offers may be benchmarked to the value that they are targeting for the new hire. So they may in fact say 5 to 8 years of experience to our company is budgeted as being worth X. They have a hiring budget. They have a salary budget. They have internal equity with respect to how a person fits within a team. But remember, that is a starting point. Getting in and excelling and advancing up the career ladder has to do with what you're able to demonstrate. So I believe you may in fact need to bite the bullet and accept a salary that a person with 8 years of experience will find competitive, and a person with 15 years of experience may not. And if you can't, then that tells you to look elsewhere. But I would urge you to think about it in terms of the longer view, and also to look at the other elements of the value proposition that that organization or sector may give you. So I'm going to call the end of the question period on this topic to an end for now. And we'll finish up. I'm going to I'm going to take a lot of interest in reading your comments while Avery's speaking. And Avery, that's not to say I'm not interested in what you have to say, because if you're feeling like you're overwhelmed about what we've just told you about and where you live right now, the experience that you're in, that's real. And it is very important to pay attention to your own energy, your own resilience, and your productivity in your job search. And I'd like to hand you over to the capable hands of Avery Morris.
Thank you very much for that, Cheryl. Hi, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Avery Morris, and today I'm going to be talking about mental wellness and resiliency. and navigating that employer bias. So a little bit about me: I'm a registered provisional psychologist at Calgary Career Counseling and our partner practice Synthesis Psychology. And at Calgary Career Counseling, we really focus on helping people make strategic and fulfilling career decisions. So some of the work we do is planning and pursuing a new career path, transitioning into a new job role, developing and achieving career goals, that kind of thing. We also have someone on staff who helps with job search strategy, resume reviews, LinkedIn, all of that good stuff, really practical, useful tips. But the emphasis is really on helping you with your career decisions while incorporating and attending to the mental and emotional well-being during the process, because it is an emotional process to go through. So just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to address why we're talking about our mental wellness while navigating employer bias, how to spot your cues that you need to prioritize your mental health, as well as strategies for success in the face of these challenges. So the goal is for me to build on what Pat and Cheryl have presented and understand that, you know, if we can tend to those things, if we can, I think, build buy-in, we're going to really find a lot more success in our approach. So next slide. Why do we talk about this? You know, a job search or transition is a difficult experience in and of itself, but that experience is compounded when we're confronting what may be employer bias, whatever those biases may be. But when we tend to our mental well-being and display resiliency, we can have an impact on our outcomes. Mentally well people are going to support their overall health, but that carries over and is demonstrated in everything that they do. We're energized and interested in the tasks we have to complete. We're also presenting that way in meetings, interviews, whatever it is. We're also going to be able to meet our goals when we're in a mentally well place. And I think also acknowledge, address, and strategize about the biases that exist. You know, what I want to really stress here is that mental well-being and resiliency are about sustainability and longevity, which is critical in the job transition process. I'm not here to say that you aren't doing these things or that these strategies are groundbreaking, but really this is a way to give us a reset, see if adjustments can be made, and reaffirm that you are doing the right things, and it is about perseverance. So I want to talk next about the mental health continuum. So for those of you who have been in previous webinars, this chart may look familiar, but for those of you that are new, we use this diagram to check in with ourselves and see if there are ways in which we're struggling. And this allows us to implement specific strategies to help improve our mental wellness. So as you'll notice from the image, the continuum goes from healthy, normal functioning, and I say normal in terms of what is standard or typical for you, through to mild distress, where we maybe notice some slight changes, to more persistent impairment, to sustained and prolonged illness in that red zone. And when we talk about mental health as being along a continuum, it allows us to look at our health as dynamic and continuously shifting. So the arrows under the 4 color blocks really indicate when we move along the spectrum, we give ourselves permission to experience changes in our mental health on a regular basis. It's okay, and it is completely expected to move between these zones in our life, and especially during the times of transition. I mean, you know, even in the chat, we can see that people are like, you know what, it's frustrating. I saw someone said that we're fortunate to be getting to work for so long. So that just shows that we're going to experience a wide range of emotions during this time. But what I want to talk about is that we may think we're handling the job transition well, but I'm sure many can attest that we have days when it feels more difficult. And when we think that there are factors about ourselves or our experience that can't be changed, like our age or our work experience, it's very easy to internalize that and see a shift in our mental health. So depending on a person, a shift in our well-being can be changes in mood, productivity, thinking patterns, attitudes, hygiene, or like even any of or all of those areas. So for example, you know, I'm too old, no one will hire me is a thought that impacts how we see ourselves. It may influence our mood, which decreases our motivation, and we might not be engaging in our job search process because we're frustrated, right? And we're upset about it. So I want you to remember that everyone has different indicators, and that's why we want to know what your own are. So, taking a look at this chart, it can give you some examples and to see where we're on this spectrum, particularly if we're not having success that we feel like we should be. And it tells us that maybe we need to take care of ourselves. Again, it's the chance to hit the reset button before we potentially hit that red zone of illness. And if you are in that red zone, it's okay. Strategies exist to help you, but you maybe want to consider retooling some things and also potentially reaching out to someone to support you during that time. So I'd like to ask the group a question just to check in with everybody and get in the practice of assessing where we are at. So considering everything I've talked about so far, I want to know what areas of your life you are noticing a change, or if you're working with clients, what patterns are you noticing with them? And feel free to select more than one option. The reality is that, we're all dealing with unique experiences and we respond to situations differently. So take some time, go through and see what you're really noticing within yourself. And again, understand it's about your own indicators. There's no right or wrong response here. So I'll give about maybe 10 more seconds or so here while some of the answers trickle in, and then we'll close the poll and see what the responses are. Okay. So having a look here, we are seeing a wide range of responses, and sounds like there's more than one thing going on for people, which is really common. Like I said, mood, thinking patterns, our energy levels, those are all things that definitely shift when we, like I said, are going through times of transition, particularly because they feel quite stressful. So what I want to do now is talk about that resiliency piece, which was, really, I think, discussed early on. And Pat had mentioned the idea about the locus of control. So I want to give us a bit of context surrounding that. So to be resilient is to effectively navigate around or through challenges. So that means that everybody has it, everybody can be resilient. We've all displayed it in the past. Again, it's not about never having issues, never feeling negative. That's not realistic. It's just not going to happen. So what we do have is locus of control. And this refers to the degree to which an individual feels a sense of agency regarding their life. And there's two types. So internal locus of control, people believe that they have some say or influence over the things that are going on. So it can be their own abilities, actions, decisions, even the mistakes that they make along the way is coming from them. Whereas a person with more of an external locus of control, they tend to feel that other forces like random chance, environmental factors, the actions of others are more responsible for the events that occur. So obviously there are some things beyond our control. That is why we are here to talk about bias today, right? We can't change our age, the industry we've come from, the work experience we have, but we can switch our focus to what we can influence. And I think that that just keeps us continually engaged in this process, right? Like I said, this is about sustainability and longevity. And, potentially there is room to overcome these initial reservations or ideas that employers may carry. And so again, this is the theme of today's webinar, right? Searching for work is tough. It is a grind and it takes time. And if we feel like there are factors working against us, it's difficult to keep going. But to find success, we have to keep working through the process and do what we can to make those elements less of a factor in our minds, as well potentially in the minds of others. So let's talk about what we can do. Now that we have a bit of an understanding of what our wellness is, what our indicators are, What are some of the strategies we can potentially put in place? When we go through a transition of any kind, and when we're facing barriers to employment, it's easier to sort of settle in and lean into the negative behaviors, the negative thoughts and emotions, because they're real, right? And we've come up against those challenges, but that can reduce our confidence. It delays us in taking action, or taking the type of action that's going to be helpful to us. So we want to put the strategies in place to improve our wellness, build our resiliency, and do so by taking care of your mind and body, evaluating what your priorities are, building our self-confidence, and also changing our own perspective on this experience. So to start, we're going to talk about self-care. I'm sure everyone's heard about this. You might even be tired of hearing about it, but this is foundational to our wellness. And they're the things that go first, right? Even having a look at some of the responses in the polls, people are saying their energy levels are down. Maybe their appearance isn't what it used to be. Hygiene, that's really common when we are in tough circumstances. So self-care serves you in the long run, but it's also going to improve your resiliency, right? If we're taking care of ourselves, we can complete the work we need to, we can show up when it's important, and we're going to potentially more effectively handle the rejections that every single one of us experiences in the job search. So the first one is move well, eat well, sleep well. Making sure we're attending to our basic needs is critical for our well-being. Any form of body movement, eating regularly, and food that will sustain us, that's going to help keep us alert and functioning well. The same can be said for getting enough sleep, which is often disrupted when we're experiencing stress. And again, if we're not feeling well, if we're lethargic and tired, it's going to be that much more difficult to do what we have to do in order to meet some of those goals. So go back, make some adjustments if you need to, prioritize this, all right? The second one is find connection. Employer bias feels like a very personal rejection during a job search, which is really tough, very demotivating. So I want you to spend time with people that make you feel good about yourself outside of that context, right? Let them know that you don't want to talk about your job search. It occupies so much of our time and energy, understandably so, but it's nice to take a step away. Focus on being in the moment with people that you feel connected to. And this is really going to help us, I think, feel good about ourselves, and we're going to be able to feed off of that positive energy and bring it forward into some of the tasks we have to complete. We also want you to stay connected to your hobbies and interests, anything that makes you feel good. I understand, again, the priority is on the job search, but we need to intentionally schedule time for other things. It builds our self-esteem and motivation. Again, these all influence each other. When we feel good, we're more likely to take action, and that helps us find success and positive outcomes. Now, the next set of strategies really connect with what Pat and Charlotte have been talking about already. It's about knowing what is important to you. Regardless of who you are or what you identify with, we have to know going into the job market what you feel you need to be accepted and supported in your next position. That's going to help you set up strategy regarding which questions to ask and how to engage in the job search process. So the values assessment is something that I do with all of the clients I work with in my career counseling and in personal counseling as well. Clarifying our values is critical for career and life planning. So, earlier it was talked about as a value proposition, and this is a chance to ask yourself, what were the important parts of the job? What made you feel successful? What are your priorities in this stage of your life? I would even go so far as to suggest making sure you have them written out so you have them as a reference point. Alignment with our values is what keeps us content and motivated in the job search and in work. So once we have a sense of our values, we want to then connect to organizations. And this is about prioritizing, again, what is most important to us and how that may or may not fit with certain organizations. Knowing how you feel about them is just as important in the process about how they potentially feel about you. And I would say in terms of like our self-esteem and confidence, it's important because being able to recognize that, well, I don't necessarily want to work for an organization that isn't inclusive in their hiring processes, isn't open to the experience I can bring, can potentially help us separate some of our self-worth from that hiring process and the rejection that we're potentially experiencing. The next set of strategies is about wants versus needs. And Cheryl had touched on this about what are your must-haves. You actually want to write out those, sort of deal breakers, and really think about that. Because if we have specific requirements, they may not be met in certain situations. And I'm not here to tell you what ones are right or wrong. That is for you to decide, right? You know your life, you understand what is important. But we have to be honest with ourselves about those wants versus needs. So in an earlier example was about compensation. And that's something we have to talk about. If there are certain income brackets that you need to be working in, are certain organizations going to provide that for you? Will they be willing to give that? Another example is the age bias and the assumption you're close to retirement. Is this true? Are you looking for lesser work, more flexible schedules? Are you in it for the long haul? Again, that's not a right or wrong answer, but we need to sort of evaluate, are there different ways of working that we need to consider, different kinds of organizations in order to meet our personal needs? And the last one here is consider your career identity. I think it can be a real loss when we have to move into something new. A lot of us have spent times in certain industries or certain roles that we felt really connected to. And it can be difficult to come up against a new environment where we feel like we are misaligned from our previous work selves. But we want to look beyond the label and see which parts of our identity we want to keep and what ones we want to develop. So this really gives us confidence when we're going into new areas and helps us address the questions that employers inevitably ask when it comes to cultural fit. And I want to stress that their identities can fit in lots of different contexts. So, an executive in oil and gas is about more than technical skills and the experience, even though they have that. It's about interpersonal skills, building consensus. Want to emphasize that in some of these conversations. Now, the next set of strategies I want to talk about are improving self-esteem. And as I mentioned, we want to continually be working towards this. So the first one is Strengths 360. This is about you assessing what your strengths are and then going into your community and asking others what they see those strengths as. It's helpful to know from people who are familiar with you in different contexts to really get a fuller picture. It's going to help us feel good about ourselves, but then practically recognize what value we can bring to an organization. We also want to address the bias. To be resilient, we have to focus on what we can influence. And it's not enough to say that there is a bias. We have to talk about, okay, what are these problems that are coming up? What are the gaps in knowledge or skills? What are the reasons that employers are saying that maybe I'm not a fit? It's not an easy thing to go through. We have to take time and reflect on that in order to actually effectively address it. So that comes over to being prepared. Understanding our strengths is important, but also understanding the bias leads us to take targeted action. So again, this has been talked about. It's through understanding technology specific to an industry, but also just more largely, right? Social media is a huge thing. How competent are you with that? And you want to have tangible ways to show your knowledge, right? Because this shows that you're a continuous learner, and employers actually do appreciate that you aren't stuck sort of in your old ways. You're familiar and willing to grow, I think is something you also really want to highlight. I also want to talk about being prepared in the context of managing rejection. It is something that every single person goes through when it comes to job searches, right? We send out the resumes, we hear nothing back. We, make it to the third round and they pick another candidate. What are you doing to support yourself during those letdowns, right? What do you do to pick yourself up? Do you need to find support to manage you sort of on the mental and emotional side of it? Because it can be really tough. And being able to recover from those, again, is how we see resiliency in this process. So now the last set of strategies I want to talk about are shifting perspectives. This is really about how we see and experience this process, and also how we can potentially shift future employers' ideas as well. So the next career phase is something that we talk about quite a bit. We are living longer, healthier lives, which means people are working longer. And I encourage everyone here to think about this transition as the next phase in your career, with a lot of time to give to an organization versus something that is a forced change or potentially biding time. Because if we believe that this is an exciting new chapter, we're going to be willing to invest in the change. We're going to come across as authentic and genuine in our connections, interviews, networking, whatever it may be. We're also going to be resilient in the process because it's something to look forward to. And if you think about in other phases of your career, it takes time to find the right role. And I know time doesn't feel like something we always have, but I also want to stress that you will find success. We just have to be able to keep at it. The next thing is communicate enthusiasm. And this again kind of builds off the next career phase. Sometimes we're not excited about having to make the move, especially if you don't feel welcome due to biases. So it makes that process more difficult. But I want you to ask, like, what are you excited about? What are the things that you hope to experience? What are the things you didn't particularly like about your previous career? Can you find, solutions to that in this next phase? Because again, we want to be able to bring that energy into our cover letters, into our connections. I think that really promotes the idea that like you're in it for the long haul, which I think leads so beautifully into be clear about your intentions. Reflecting about what you hope to get out of this next phase, and you want to communicate that. Weave this into cover letters and interviews by highlighting the long-term plans. You can even reference that this is the next phase of your career. We don't want to leave employers guessing about our intentions. And then finally, challenge your thoughts. This is something that we want to actively do because again, it promotes that resiliency and willingness to stay with it. When we're constantly thinking negative things, our entire outlook becomes negative, and it is mentally and emotionally draining. So you want to identify what the negative thought is, see if you can find facts, not feelings, to support it, and then reframe the thought. So an example is no one will hire individuals from the oil and gas sector. The evidence or the facts are that it can be challenging, but people are given opportunities. So the thought becomes, it can be a challenge, but there are opportunities for me to be hired into a new industry. I just haven't found them yet. This is a more balanced, realistic way of looking at things, and it's going to keep us motivated. Again, it's not about denying the emotion there. It's just about reframing it so we don't feel so demotivated in the process. So those are some of the strategies that I hope you can take away. I do want to outline some different websites that have resources and information available. They're kind of a mix here. Some of them are definitely focused on more of the personal side of things, like the Canadian Mental Health Association, Calgary Career Counseling, Distress Center, and Synthesis. Alice, the Alberta government website, is great. There's also this website, ONET Online. It is American, but it has lots of information, and you can do specific searches based on your skills, interests, to get an idea of what jobs or sectors might be a fit for you. So really valuable tools to sort of check out. And so finally, if you need any further information or support, again, working with either someone who focuses on career, or you just need some support on the mental emotional side, you can visit us at careercounseling.com, call us, truly reach out if you need anything. And I just want to say thank you. And remember that the ways you take care of yourself this time are really important. You have skills and experiences that are valuable. So look after yourself, and remember that it's not if you find a job, it's when. So I will turn it back over. Thank you everyone for your time.
Great. Thank you, Avery. Really, really appreciate that, that information, and just, it is, again, just following what we're, reading in the chat. We don't want to downplay how difficult this transition is and how difficult job search is. So really appreciate all your tips. We're going to move and take some more questions because there's a lot of them. And maybe just backing up a little bit, there was a lot of questions about how to balance communicating experience while not disclosing age in your resume. Are there any rules of thumb related to how many years back you should go, or, some say 10, some say 15. And my advice is to not look at your resume from a chronological perspective. it's more about how are you communicating that you have the capability of addressing what that company needs. So it's not about only go 10 years back, only go 15 years back. It's about relevancy. And so, so it may be cobbling experience you've had over your career, but just focusing on that's most relevant for that employer. And so I know there was another question about when do you use the terminology for your to question or for the to sector, where in your resume, covering letter, when do you use that? And I'm just going to say all of the time. Remember, you have to do that translation between what you're bringing to the table from a value, skills, knowledge perspective. You need to translate that for the sector or the employer that you're interested in. And so it's not only in your covering letter or your resume, but it's in any kind of interactions that you're having with a potential employer, or even as part of your market research. Demonstrate that you've been doing your homework, and when you're networking, when you're talking to people, that you understand how that to industry works by demonstrating it with the information that you use. Cheryl, do you have anything else to add in terms of, advice on resumes?
Yeah, I would say that just to remember that with larger companies, they often have electronic resume scanning software. And so it's really important to use that terminology in that case, or you don't know who's reviewing the resumes and sorting them into, the various piles, and they may not recognize your oil and gas language. They just may be familiar with their own sector's language. So I agree, it takes some work, but this is what this is all about, doing the research and putting your best foot forward with respect to what you bring to the table. And that means that that translation job.
Great, thanks. I wanted to address, the frustration, and again, totally recognize what's maybe being asked for in a job posting and what you think might be realistic in terms of, the kinds of skills or experience they're asking for. And then there seems to be a disconnect in terms of the years of experience attached to all that skills and experience. And again, we've talked a little bit about that. And I think that, the key message here is that job posting process and job search, just applying to job postings when you're trying to deal with biases and targeting companies that may value your experience more than others, like the large companies, to the fact that what Cheryl just said in terms of how they're going to go through your resume, that's going to be a miss. You have to, your tactics for connecting with potential employers has to be broader than just applying to job postings. Need to incorporate that networking, need to incorporate doing, trying to connect with an industry that you're interested in by attending those networking sessions, by going to meetups, because that's where some of that relationship building can happen. And it's going to add to your repertoire of connecting with an employer or learning more about an employer or an industry that will appreciate the value that you bring to the table more so.
I think I'll just add to that. Now I flipped the slide because I recognize that we've hit 11:30. So for any of you who have to leave, we do want to leave you with how to stay connected with us through LinkedIn. or directly. And we have an ongoing survey that we'd love you to participate in that helps us to have a better understanding of the labor supply pool. So I'll just leave this slide open. But just to layer on to what Pat was saying and what Avery has said, there are so many things that you can't control, and that's a fact. The best you can do is focus on what you can control. And, I do believe that and hope that focusing on your value in the different ways that we have expressed, and by interacting with potential employers, going beyond applying to postings, will be the most effective way to do it. But any of you who've worked inside companies know that sometimes people say, we want somebody that's a little younger. You cannot control that. That happens. And the best thing you can do is just move on from it. I saw a chat again, a note about the frustration about, ageism. And I think, I'm a mature person as well, but I think what you have, other than, again, the experience, the different work environments, education, so on and so forth, I think also what you have is you're at a different point in your life where you've got flexibility that younger people may not have, to be able to do gigs, to cobble together a full-time job with contracts. Maybe you don't need benefits in the same way if your children are no longer dependents. So, again, working through starting with you will help you to think about the what do I want, what do I need piece. And I'd urge you to think about some of those things as advantages that you bring to the table that the younger set may not have. Yeah, Pat, anything else on answers to Q&A?
Just to reiterate that, yes, we will be circulating the PowerPoint and the recording. And, there's so many questions here about, positioning yourself to employers and that kind of stuff, that, one of the ways that we try to address questions that we don't get to during our webinars is in our newsletter. And so if we haven't, sort of addressed something in completion here, stay tuned. We will address some of these things in our FAQs that are in our newsletter as well. Cheryl, maybe one of the other questions that did come up was around, how do you suggest you're willing to take a pay cut or a lesser position? When you're willing to do that.
Yeah. If you're talking about an application with a covering letter and a resume, I would say that's in the covering letter, not the resume. The resume doesn't get into things like that. The resume is presenting your job, your skills, your education, and how you've applied them. With the covering letter, I think I would do that by starting with the viewpoint that you've done your market research on the sector and that you have a realistic understanding of the expectations, and that you're excited about what the sector has to offer you and the value you can bring by applying what you've built over the years to help the company to be more productive and more competitive and so on. So I would do that in a less direct way in the covering letter, and obviously you can express those same sentiments in person. You kind of need to put that pitch together, write it down and practice it so those words come out easily. Somebody in the chat said, you know what, let's be real. I was offered a job that was 30% less than what I was making in oil and gas. I acknowledge that if I was offered a job in oil and gas for 30% more, that uptick, I would leave. You've got to decide how you're going to deal with that. You're obviously not going to tell the employer that. So you're either going to make a decision that you are interested in the long run and communicate that, or try to, sort of wing it and get through that. But, people pick up on those sorts of things, and employers are fearful that you're just saying that to get the job. So honestly, you need to make a decision about what's best for you, and the practicalities, the probability of success with your approach. And nobody can tell you about that. And 30% is a big hit, but we've all done it. And it's a personal decision. I think that's all I'd say about that.
I did just want to sort of add to the piece around what if you're applying to a posting where a cover letter is not required or specifically requests that you just submit the resume. And so, again, it eliminates an opportunity for you to tell your transition story and why. I think probably the best suggestion in that case is, do add 1 or 2 lines on your resume, whether that be a career objective or, upfront as to, what you're doing in your career, making the transition and why. That's probably the only opportunity really you can do it in that situation where a covering letter isn't required. But again, this is where, if you can connect with somebody in that company or connect with somebody, that where you can tell your story and start doing that relationship building, that's going to help with those kinds of things as well. And I think that, again, that also suggests where some of your job search focus might need to be, and not on those companies that are going to use electronic screening there, where you can't get past, sort of the automated systems. It's about connecting with those companies where you might actually get to talk to somebody.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll just close by saying, somebody asked about, the rule of thumb. Do you show 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience, or work history? Pat already answered. I was in human resources in the corporate world for, I think 25 years. Anybody who gives you a rule of thumb, and that's probably a career consultant or a resume specialist, don't accept it, because that's their rule of thumb. It's not the rule of thumb for the employer. And you need to make your own decision about that. And I agree with Pat in terms of her response to that. But I just wanted to leave you with that. Rules of thumb are suspect. Just you should be, your first reaction should be, how does it work for me? And bring it back to principles. So Pat, should we close?
I think so.
Your questions have been amazing. I hope it's made this experience richer for you. It certainly has made it more interesting for everybody, I believe, and I hope you've benefited to a greater extent. We've definitely hit a hot button on this topic, just evidenced by going 10 minutes over, and a good number of participants sticking with us. So we have left you with information to contact us. We're experts in some things, not in everything, but we hope you'll continue to follow us and attend our next webinar if you're interested in applying your oil and gas domain knowledge into digital oil and gas on November the 10th. So we very much thank you for your time, and we hope we've helped, and we do acknowledge the difficult journey that you're on, and we've been there, and we have faith in you. You'll get there. You'll get to where you need to go. So thank you so much.